There we are. Okay, so what we're going to do today is we are going to continue on with our look at complex experimental design. So we introduced this last time that we met, and now we're going to continue on and take a look at more of these complex experimental designs, mostly to get a facility of how to work with them, how to interpret them correctly, how to basically distinguish between a main effect and interactions, and to correctly interpret interactions. So just a kind of flashback at what we've covered last time. So we took a look at the effects of learning style and testing style on memory or on test performance. And basically, this could be used to ask a question such as, are learning tools, such as poems about what you're trying to learn, are they actually beneficial? And then we also set up a question or a look at a study that had to do with sexual predatory behavior. Specifically, it was looking at trying to explain why is it that, for example, in the Me Too movement, most of the people that were accused were males, and it was only later on in the Me Too movement that some of the accusers were women as well. So this is something that is important to take a look at, especially in our society, because we want to battle against sexual harassment, right? We want that to go down. As psychologists, we want to find out what is the cause of sexual harassment so we can make sexual harassment go down. And is gender the cause of sexual harassment, where males, just because of some factor, are more likely to be to sexually harass than women are? Or is it something else? Is it power differentials? So you'll notice here that every single accuser, every single person that was accused in Hollywood in the Me Too movement was always a very powerful person in Hollywood, whether they were a super powerful producer, whether they were an A-list star, whether they were a comedy icon, or whether they were a female director of movies. So it was always people in power. So is it power? What does that have to, how does that affect sexual harassment? And this is an important thing to know, because as our society changes and as women, for example, move into more powerful positions, it's very important to know, how do we address sexual harassment? Is it a male issue? Is it a power issue? Or is it some interaction of both of those? And then what we're going to get to today to set this up is a look at another very interesting study that was looking for interactions in terms of the perception of intelligence and its interaction with beauty. So the question is that if you were, or if a person was going to award a scholarship, would the attractiveness of the applicant have any effect on who was awarded that scholarship? So the first question was, would the attractiveness of the applicant have an effect? The second question is, what effect is it going to have? Is somebody who's highly attractive going to have more of a chance to get the scholarship than somebody who's unattractive? Or is somebody who's highly attractive going to have less of a chance to get that scholarship? So are they going to be biased against attractive individuals, or are they going to be biased against unattractive individuals? Incidentally, this is a professional model, I've been told, who, you can see right here, who works, I guess, with the Ugly Modeling Agency. So if you ever wonder in Hollywood when they're casting for films and they need somebody unattractive, this is the type of agency that they go to. So, he is fully aware and making tons of money off of his looks. So anyways, so is it going to be beneficial to be attractive, or is it going to be detrimental to be attractive in terms of scholarships? And is this benefit going to change depending upon whether or not you're a female applicant versus a male applicant? And finally, is that effect going to change depending upon whether you're being judged by a male judge or a female judge? So we have tons of sort of interacting causes, tons of interacting variables, and we'll see how it all shakes out as we continue our look at these complex experimental designs. So what we'll do is just real quick, we'll have a recap of what the factorial designs are, and then we're going to continue on with our interpretation of factorial designs. We'll have a quick recap of the rhyming and semantic learning, just so that we can see once again how to interpret these factorial designs. We're going to move into power and biases in sexual interest, and then we'll probably only have time to set up the attractiveness and perceived academic merit study, looking at how does attractiveness affect perceptions of intelligence, something that is not at all associated with, but how does that affect those perceptions of intelligence? All right, so as we saw last time, these factorial designs, these complex experimental designs, they are used when you're asking a question and it has more than one cause. So they're very highly used in psychology because our behaviors tend to have more than one cause, right? Our behaviors tend to be an amalgamation of a number of different causes which contribute to our final, behavior. So if you want to understand behavior, you need to understand how these causes interact with each other. Sometimes they change the effect of a variable or a cause depending upon whether both of them are present or not. So, for example, if you want to know the effect of watching sad movies and listening to sad music on depression for men and women, you would use the factorial design where you might have sad and control movies, you might have sad and control music, and you might have men and women, and every single combination of these three variables would be used so that you would have a 2 by 2 by 2 factorial design, and that indicates that you have two levels of your first variable, sad and control movies, two levels of your second variable, sad and control music, and then two levels of your third variable, males and females, and you would use every single combination. And this is the type of experiment that you would need to do in order to see interactions. So it might be that watching sad movies contributes to depression. And it might be that watching sad music contributes to depression. But it could be that doing both super contributes to depression, just makes it way worse than either of them in isolation. So that would be an example of an interaction where movies might contribute to depression a little bit, music might contribute to depression a little bit, but you put the two together and it's like an exponential explosion of depression. That could only be revealed in a study like this factorial design. And just by way of recap, as we mentioned, factorial designs, they have those multiplications. Because you're taking the levels of one of your variable and you're multiplying it by the levels of all of your other variables. So if you have two variables, one has two levels, the other one has four levels, you have 8 different combinations. If you then add a third variable that has 3 levels, you end up with 24 combinations. If you then add another level with 4 variables, you'd end up with 96 combinations. So the combinations can get very massive with just a few variables added. Typically, in most studies, 3 levels is where people can sort of keep the story alive in their head. So when you're doing your advanced lab, oftentimes what I find is students, the first time that they get to do research, they're like, oh, I want to see what the effects of movies are, and music, and social media use, and the age that you are, and the gender that you are, and whether or not you have a single parent or 2 parents, and whether or not you have a pet or don't have a pet. And those are all great questions, but when you put them together in one big, huge experiment, you end up with like 842 conditions, and it's really hard to follow that in your mind. So just as a sort of public service announcement for your future academic performance, limit it to 3 variables. And we'll see a nice example of that when we take a look at perceived attractiveness and scholarship merit. All right, speaking of limiting the variables, when we did our study, we had 3 levels of group type. We had individuals, we had pairs, and we had groups of 3. We had 2 levels of items. We had correct items and we had critical items. And individuals, saw the correct items and were exposed to the critical items. Pairs, correct items and critical items. Groups of 3, correct items and critical items. We had 6 separate conditions, or 6 unique conditions. All right, and just the last thing in this really quick recap in general. These interactions, if you have an interaction, that's where your story is. If you have an interaction, that's where the true effect comes out. So if you are trying to treat depression and you are trying to treat obsessive compulsive disorder and you had this new miracle pharmacological treatment, you can have an outcome to an experiment where there's no main effect of your treatment. The measures of functioning before the treatment are the same as the measures of functioning after the treatment. And there is no difference between the levels of functioning for people that are depressed and the levels of functioning for the people that are obsessive compulsive. So there's no difference between the level of functioning of these 2 disorders in your experiment. There's no difference pre or post in the experiment. Looks like your drug is a failure, where in reality it could be that your drug has an interaction where there's no effect because the pre-levels here cancel out or balance the post levels here. But as you can see, when you take a look at the interaction, we have a cure for obsessive compulsive disorder. We got poison for depression, a clue to what is driving depression, and this would be a highly successful experiment. Really interesting result only comes out in the interaction. All right, before we get to the new stuff, just one last recap of the last experiment that we looked at. So we wanted to know, does the best learning style depend upon the testing or real life situation? So learning style is something that a lot of educators are very interested in. Myths surrounding learning style are rampant. So people don't actually learn better in their preferred learning style. That is a myth. So if they don't learn better in their preferred learning style, is there a better learning style depending upon the kind of testing or real life situation that they might encounter? So Morris, Bransford, and Franks did this study where they had 2 types of encoding conditions, 2 types of learning, rhyme or semantic. They had 2 types of tests, either a rhyming test or a standard test. And what they found was that in general, so these are the results, and in general, what they found was that there's a better way to encode, but only slightly. So the effects of encoding things semantically, there's the average right there, is only slightly better than the effects of encoding things by rhyme. There's the average right there. So it seems like in terms of encoding, in terms of learning style, semantic encoding is no better than rhyming encoding. So it really seems that each learning style would be particularly the same level of effectiveness. However, in terms of testing, there was a definite better way of testing, so that a standard recognition test led to about 72% performance, whereas a rhyming recognition test led to about 40% performance. So there's definitely an effect of the type of test. But the clear story, the real sort of what's going on, comes out in the interaction. And it turns out that the learning style that's the best to use is the one that matches with how you're going to be tested. So if you're going to be tested on a standard recognition test, which is what the real world typically falls under, then rhyming is not as good as semantic. You're better off learning to understand the material. You're better off with semantic encoding. But if you live in a world where there are rhyme recognition tests, if you live in a world where the job that you're going to enter into requires you to rhyme things rather than recall things, well then it would be better to go to a university that teaches you how to rhyme information rather than teaches you the meaning of information. But again, this does not occur in the real world. So again, it comes out into the interaction where which encoding condition is better depends upon what your test is. So one nice way to remember interactions is that if somebody is asking you for advice, it depends on 2 factors. So if somebody says, oh, I'm studying for a test in my Spanish class, Should I use rhyming encoding or should I use semantic encoding? As a psychologist, which one do you think will be better? If there's an interaction, before you answer, you have to say, I need one more piece of information because the effect depends upon or interacts with something else. What is your recognition test going to be like? And if they say, oh, it's a standard kind of multiple choice test, then you say, oh, in that case, now that I have two pieces of information, I can tell you semantic encoding, that's the way to go. But if they say, oh, our teacher likes to give us rhyming tests, then you say, oh, well, that completely changes my answer. Because rather than doing semantic encoding, if they're doing a rhyming test, you should do rhyming coding. So which one is better, semantic or rhyming coding? It depends. Depends on the type of a test. If it depends, that means that there's an interaction. All right, so that was the interaction. You do learn better if you're, you do show more learning when you're tested in the way, or sorry, when you learn in the way that you're going to be tested. So unless you need to write poems about whales, it's more effective to learn about whales, not in a rhyming kind of way, but in a more straightforward, traditional semantic way. All right, so that was all the recap stuff. Let's get to some of the new stuff. So, in terms of the perception of sexual interest. Whenever, so if anybody has been following the Me Too movement, when people are accused in the Me Too movement, what do they usually defend themselves with? Does anybody know what somebody like Harvey Weinstein would say, or what somebody like Kevin Spacey might say? We're going to leave Bill Cosby out of this because Bill Cosby clearly, well, I'll mention that in just a little bit. But does anybody remember what these people typically say? What is a typical person who's sexually harassing another individual? When they get accused, what's their typical go-to excuse? Mm-hmm.
They thought that the other person was interested, that the other person wanted it, they perceived an interest in it.
So typically when sexual harassment occurs, it occurs because whoever did the harassing perceived sexual interest in the other individual, perceived that they wanted it, perceived that they were receptive to those advances, to that compliment. So it's very rare, I'm not saying it's completely unheard of, but it's very rare that people do this not thinking that the other person is interested. It's very rare that they do any sort of sexual harassment thinking, I'm doing this specifically to injure this person. Usually it's, you know what, I'm doing this to pursue some sort of sexual relation with this individual. And, you know, people like Harvey Weinstein will say, well, she was into it. She was interested. They'll say things like she was giving off all the signals, right? So that is something that's very interesting psychologically. Again, we'll leave Cosby out of it. Because why are we picking up those signals? Why are they misperceiving those signals? So they're clearly misperceiving it. That's what makes it partially sexual harassment. Sorry, that's partially what makes it sexual harassment. So let me rephrase that. It is sexual harassment, but part of what makes it sexual harassment is whether or not it's welcome. So is it because, again, why is it that they're doing this? Is it a misperception of sexual interest? And if so, why are they misperceiving sexual interest? Are they misperceiving sexual interest because that's the way males are brought up in our culture? Are males just continually told, of course they want it, sure they want it. When they say no, they mean yes. If they say no, that means yes. And the more they say no, the more interested they are, right? Is it something like that? Is it the way that men are trained in our society? Or does it have something to do with power? And if it has something to do with power, that means that we should expect powerful women also to start down a path of sexual harassment as well. So as more women become bosses, as more women get places of power, should we as psychologists expect more sexual harassment cases to occur, this time for subordinates of these female bosses? All right, so that's what the study here was taking a look at. So this is Kunstman and Maynard, and they had a staged manipulation. So we'll recap this before we go into what we think they might find. So they had a staged manipulation, and participants were told that they were going to make decisions with a partner on a task that was going to simulate decision making in organizations. So it was basically like, okay, you guys are going to pretend that you're part of this business, and we're just going to see how you make your decisions in terms of the day-to-day operations of an organization. So that was a lie. This was a staged manipulation. That was not what it was about. The actual experiment was about biases and sexual interest. The actual experiment was about perceived sexual interest. So prior to interacting, so before they met their partners, they were given a 2-minute video of their opposite sex partner. So they were doing opposite sex partners, so this was for heterosexual relationships, and they would watch a 2-minute video of their partner. They would basically say, okay, well here, look at this monitor over here. This is the person you're going to be working with. We just taped this, just a little bit ago. So watch this person. Here's their 2-minute video. And they would watch a 2-minute video of their opposite sex partner, and then they would answer questions about that partner's sexual interest in them, their perceived sexual interest in the subject. So the participants were male or female, and they were always placed in opposite sex groups. So if you were male, you watched a female video. If you were female, you watched a male video. And that part was all staged. But then what happened is that they were placed in either a power position or an equal position. So prior to watching this video, prior to interacting, they were placed in either a power position or an equal position. And the way that was manipulated was as follows. There was points in this experiment for participating. So all of you have gone through this experience. You had that intro to, that general psychology part of that subject pool where you could earn participation points for completing experiments. In this situation, if you were in the power position, you were told that it was your decision at the end of the experiment how to split up the participation points. So they would say something like, well, there's 10 participation points for the both of you for participating in this experiment, and you are in a power position. So you're going to decide, do you want to split it 5 and 5? Do you want to split it 7 for yourself, 3 for the other person? Depending upon how they perform, do you want to take 9 for yourself and only give them 1? Whatever it is, you come up with that decision. That's the power position. The other half of the subjects were placed in an equal position, where they were told, oh, there's 10 points in total for participating in this experiment. You're going to get 5, and your partner's going to get 5. So they were put in that equal position. So the question is that going to affect their perceived interest? If you are in a power position, would that make you misperceive interest in a potential sexual partner? All right, so once again, we have subject sex, we got power condition. So we had male subjects that watched a staged female video. We had female subjects that watched the staged male video. And then these subjects here were either placed into a leader condition or they were placed in a condition where they were equals. So we have 2 levels for subject sex. We got 2 levels for power condition. So we have 4 separate conditions. We have males that were placed in the power condition. We have males that were placed in the equal condition. We have females that were placed in the power condition. And we have females that were placed in the equal condition. So they're placed in these conditions. They watched their video. And then they were asked the following types of questions. They filled out a survey and they said on a scale of, let's just go with 1 to 10. On a scale of 1 to 10, rate the truth of these statements. I could see this person having romantic or sexual feelings for me. So the person that you just watched in the video, you have to rate whether they would be interested in you. I could see this person wanting to ask me out on a date. So you have to rate the person that you saw in that video. How likely are they to want to ask you out on a date? Basically, how much sexual interest do you think that the person in the video would have in you? That's the question that they were asking. And they wanted to know, is that affected by whether you're a male or a female? Is that affected by whether you're a leader or an equal? And is it differently affected for leaders and equals if you're male versus if you're female? That's the question that they were looking at. All right, everybody clear on that setup and what they were measuring? All right, let's see what they found. So here is the basic matrix of these two conditions. So once again, were you in a leader position or were you in an equal position? And was it a male subject or was it a female subject that was judging the sexual interest of the person on the video? The dependent variable was a score of your expectation of sexual interest. So the higher the score, this is the ESI score, the higher the score, the more you thought that the person in the video was interested in you. The more you thought that they were receptive to your sexual interest, expectation of sexual interest, the more you thought that they would be open to your sexual attention. Independent variable A was the power condition. There was two levels. Were you placed in a power position as a leader or were you an equal? Independent variable B was subject sex. There was two levels. Were you a male subject or were you a female subject? And it was a 2x2 design, so we have all four combinations of those variables. All right, so let's take a look at power condition first. Leaders versus equals. The question is, was there a main effect of power condition? So in and of itself, does power over a person affect your expectation of sexual interest? If you have a position of authority over an individual, are you more likely to perceive them as being sexually interested in you, or are you less likely to see them as being sexually interested in you? So in our matrix of variables here, basically this main effect is saying that we are only interested in the difference between leaders and equals, and we're no longer interested in males versus females. So it's just people that are in a leadership position. Are they more likely or less likely to have expectations of sexual interest than people who are placed in an equal condition? Which one of those do we think is going to occur? All right, so there we go. So any thoughts, any predictions? What do we think is going to happen for this male effect? For this main effect. That was a Freudian slip. Mm-hmm.
I would think that the leaders will have more expectation of sexual interest than the equals. Because when you're a leader, like, you might think that the people below you will want something from you, and often a way to get those things would be in a sexual way.
Okay. So you would imagine that they would be looking to you for resources and basically looking for a trade. Like they would be more willing to trade sexual favors for your help in a certain endeavor. Okay. Not as crass as that, not like they're prostituting themselves, but more likely to be open to that possibility.
Yeah.
Okay, so higher expectations of sexual interest for people in power. Any other speculations? Does anybody predict the opposite occurrence? Okay, does anybody have any other theories about why power might increase your expectation of sexual interest, why power might increase your perception of what of how interested your subordinates are? Mm-hmm.
I think maybe like being in a leadership position puts you like it could like boost your confidence and feel like maybe you've earned your way there, and so other people would be interested in you.
Okay, so it might boost your confidence. So as a leader, you might have just greater confidence. The more confident you are, of course, the more you would imagine other people would find you impressive, right? That's almost the definition of confidence. If you're an unconfident person, you probably sit there thinking, why would anybody ever be interested in me? I'm not good at anything. So conversely, if you're a confident person, you might think to yourself, everybody's going to be interested in me because I'm amazing. So if power boosts your confidence, then it would boost your expectation of sexual interest in other individuals. All right. Any other speculations or ideas about what might be going on here? Mm-hmm.
Kind of along with that, if you're in a power position, you're not always used to people telling you no or saying no to you. So you could just assume that they're gonna say yes.
Okay. So that's another thing that might occur. You could be surrounded by yes people, right? So basically any idea of yours, you're going to think that they're going to be open to. So do you guys want to go to this restaurant? Yes, we do. What a great suggestion. Do you guys want to try this new project? Yes, we do. What a great suggestion. Do you want to go out with me on Friday night? Yes, we do. What a great suggestion. So if you're surrounded by people continually saying yes because you're in a position of power, then of course that's probably going to extend to all facets of life. So if you are wondering, would somebody be open to a sexual relationship with you, then if they're more likely to say yes in general, they're more likely to say yes to that as well. All right, so those are all really good possibilities. And very nicely, all of them just had to do with people. So it's very good that none of you in here were like, well, males might do this and females might do that. That's not what we're looking at here. So it's a really good sign that we understand our main effects, because we were just looking at people as leaders and people as equals. And what they found was that among equals, the expectation of sexual interest, when they scored this, higher scores mean greater expectations of sexual interest. Higher scores mean you perceived the person in the video would be more interested in you. When people were placed as in the equals position, they scored 2.44 on that scale. When they were placed in the leadership position, they scored 3.15. And that was a significant difference. That was a real difference. Not due to chance. This is the girl on the basketball team winning by 20-1, right? This is the girl on the basketball team winning 100 games in a row. People in a leadership position actually do perceive their subordinates as being more sexually interested in them. So if you're power over a person, does that affect your expectation of sexual interest? The answer is yes. Now, everybody here had a good kind of suggestion in terms of why that might be. The one in the paper that they had is a little, I think we have more hope for humanity in here than psychology sometimes shows that we should. So their leading theory about why this occurred is that the more power you have over somebody, the less you look at them as a human being, and the more you look at them as a tool that can help you attain your goals. So it's almost like the more power you have, the more dehumanizing people under you become. So, and the more that you use them to attain your own goals. So a boss doesn't look at necessarily their employees and say, I wonder how I'm going to make all of these people better. They look at their employees and say, I wonder how I can use them to make me better. I wonder how I can use them to make me more money, or make me more successful, or make my projects, better projects. They see them as tools. And if your goal is to make more money, you see your employees as tools that you can use to make more money. If your goal is to be more successful, you see your employees as tools to be more successful. If your goal is to gratify your own sexual urges, you unconsciously see your employees as tools to gratify your own sexual urges, and tools don't say no. Of course tools are interested. A hammer is very interested in hammering a nail. That's what it's there for. So the less you see people as humans and the more you see them as tools because you have power over them, the more you're able to misperceive sexual interest. So very importantly, these two groups watched the same videos. It was the exact same video. So all those stories that people say about, they were giving off the signals, they were showing interest. You should have seen the way they commented my jacket the other day. Of course they wanted it. They truly believe that. They honestly think that these people are sending them the signals because the same video caused these two numbers. And the only difference here is whether you were a leader or you were an equal. Leaders misperceive sexual interest. And that is why sensitivity training and other sort of empathic trainings are going to have a hard time tackling sexual harassment, because it's not insensitive to ask somebody out on a date if they're interested in you, right? It's not insensitive if you have somebody at a party and they're sitting there and they're thinking to themselves, oh my gosh, I hope he comes over here. Oh my goodness, I hope he asks me out. Oh, I've been crushing on him forever. And I've been sending out all the signals. I really hope he comes over here and asks me out. If you go over there and you say, hey, do you want to go out on Friday? That's great. That's amazing. That's awesome. That's super good for them. You don't need sensitivity training. Sensitivity training is not going to combat this. This is a perception problem, right? This is a basic human perceived bias. So this is why if we were applying this to the workforce, as psychologists, if you were walking into a situation, you would say, no harassment training, no sensitivity training, no training on how to read signals in a social situation. All of those are going to backfire because power is causing people to misperceive those cues. Power is causing people to misperceive those cues. So how do we get rid of sexual harassment? You put in rules that are according to power. You put in rules like bosses cannot date their subordinates. You put in rules that you cannot comment on people's, outfits. You put in those rules because you can't leave it to perception to decide whether it's okay or not, because leaders are going to continue to do that they're going to continue to misperceive it. So I remember when I was first starting to TA, we had a 1-hour seminar, training workshop on how to TA. And I thought we were going to go in there and learn how to supervise exams and learn how to use administrative systems and learn how to, do office hours and everything. 45 minutes of it was don't date your students. Literally, don't date your students for 45 minutes. Why? We were in positions of power. We were leaders. As little as that power is, right? It's not like we were masters of the universe. We were TAs, but we were in that position of power. They knew we would misperceive interest. They knew that we would say, oh, that student that I'm TAing, they seem very interested in me. They were giving me all, they knew. So they just put the rule in, don't trust your perceptions. You're not allowed to date them. And then we had another 10 minutes on what to do if you do date them. If you do the stupid thing and you break the rule, this is what you do. And then we had 5 minutes about how to set up office hours and things like that. All right, so psychology says just being a leader makes you more likely to perceive sexual interest in your subordinates. What about the effects of males versus females? What about those societal, maybe biological influences that we have in terms of these differences? Is there a main effect for males versus females? That is, do males have higher expectations of sexual interest than females do? Or is it maybe vice versa? Do females maybe have a higher expectation of sexual interest than males do? So again, in this case, what we're looking at is we're looking at the gender differences without looking at leaders and equals. So we take the male subjects that were in the leader position, take the male subjects that were in the equal position, and we just combine them. And we take the female subjects in the leader position, we take the female subjects in the equal position, and we just combine those as well, and we calculate the expectations of sexual interest for these particular levels. So any predictions on this? Bless you. Is one going to be higher than the other? If so, which one? Mm-hmm.
I think people would be equal.
Okay, and why is that?
So in high school, I didn't have a whole lot of classes I could take, but I did have a whole lot of time at school because I didn't have a car.
Yep.
And so I used to TA a lot, and I also had a freshman level class. And I remember being in class with them, and then I remember being a TA, and I felt like
Okay, so you felt that same sort of effect of power.
Yeah.
So you would imagine that it should be the same for males and females, that females feel that power change as well. Okay. Any other possibilities? Yep.
I don't know if this is necessarily it, but I know a lot in society, I'm not sure about now, but at least at growing up, it was largely perceived that, or largely like said that most females probably weren't interested in a lot of men,
Mm-hmm.
but any men would be interested in almost any woman.
Mm-hmm.
So it's possible that females just perceive more sexual interest from men just because they think any man would be interested in them.
Okay. So it's quite possible that the female score here will be higher because the females are going to watch this video and they're going to be asked, would this person be interested in dating you? And they might say, well, yeah, he's a guy. Of course he's going to be interested in dating me. Right? So it could be that the females are actually going to have higher scores than the males. Any other possibilities? Anybody want to argue for males having higher expectations of sexual interest than females?
On that
Mhm.
same note, it could be that men could be higher just because they feel that they're entitled, they have that societal delusion that they're entitled
Okay.
to receiving more sexual interest than women.
All right, so they might have been socialized to feel like they are entitled to that. Mm-hmm.
I feel like females are more likely to be self-conscious and like think that people wouldn't be attracted to them or interested in them, so that might have an effect also.
Okay, so if women have been socialized to be more self-conscious, then in that case, it would almost be like that lower confidence level, right? So it's like, oh, is this person going to be interested in you? And it's like, well, I have such low confidence. Of course not, right? Why would they? Why would they be interested in me? So it could be that women have lower expectations of sexual interest. Yep.
I think it also could be possible for it to be higher in females because I think culturally it's traditionally the male that like approaches a woman
Mm-hmm.
or starts a conversation.
Mm-hmm.
And so, if that's how males know how to start relationships, I think they'd be more likely to say that person might want to date with me. Whereas
Mhm.
with female who I find as a female, I usually get approached more than I approach other people, just
Yep.
culturally.
So just statistically, you would imagine that the females would say, yeah, there are more expectations of sexual interest coming from the male in the video, just because that's the society that we live in. The initiation of sexual interest comes from the males most often. So those are all great suggestions, and that's just kind of giving you an example. That's the kind of critical thinking that you should be doing when you're reading your articles. So before you get to the results section, much like we're doing right here, before you get to the results section, you should think to yourself, what might happen in this situation? What is going to happen? Are females going to have higher expectations of sexual interest? Because males are more likely to initiate, the sexual interest. Or is it males going to have higher levels of sexual interest because they're more entitled? Or females have lower self-esteem or more self-conscious? Or there might not be any difference between the two, maybe because of this. So that's the kind of critical thinking that you want to do. Try to guess what's going to happen. And that's one of the reasons I love studies like this, because occasionally in a study like this, you'll have good reasons why it could go any way. So we had very plausible explanations for why it should be higher in males. We had very plausible explanations for why it should be higher in females. We had very plausible explanation for why it should be the same. What's it going to be? Well, as it turns out, they're actually the same. So there actually is no difference in terms of the expectations of sexual interest. That is that p-value I was talking to you before about. That means that the difference that they found was most likely due to chance. It was most likely a random difference. And you'll notice that I don't have numbers here. And that is because the results section that they wrote was not friendly enough for me to find those numbers easily. And do you remember how when we were writing our results section, I said, let's put in the means every single time we report something. So when we say, for correct items, singles, mean of 40, recalled fewer items than pairs, mean of 70, then groups of 3, mean of 80. They didn't do that here, so they gave me the stats, so I know, and they gave me the explanation that there's no difference. They weren't friendly, that's why we got no numbers here. I don't think we got numbers for the interaction either, but we know that there was no main effect, so there was no difference. So surprise, surprise. All right, interaction. Does power interact with subject sex? So we've seen that there is an effect of leadership, that going from equals to leadership increases your expectation of sexual interest. So we want to know if power affects males differently than it does females. And basically what we're saying is, we know that power here increases your expectation of sexual interest. Your expectation of sexual interest goes higher when you become a leader. The question is the difference between equals and leaders bigger for males than it is for females, or is the difference between equals and leaders bigger for females than it is for males? If either of those is true, we have an interaction. If neither of those is true, if the difference between equals and leaders is the same for males as it is for females, then we have no interaction. So another way of saying that is, if somebody asks you, what's the size of the effect in terms of expectation of sexual interest going from equals to a leadership position, what's the size of that effect? If you have to ask them, well, it depends. Are you talking about males or are you talking about females? If it depends, that's an interaction. If it doesn't depend, then we have no interaction. So what do we think is going to happen? What do we think is going to be the outcome? Is there an interaction? Is there no interaction? And if so, why is that the case? It's a little bit hard to maybe visualize some of these. All right, let me give you an example of what I mean. All right, let's say that guys, let's say that expectation of sexual interest has to do with confidence, right? Let's say that that's what's going on with expectations of sexual interest. It all has to do with confidence. When you're an equal, you're not very confident. When you're a leader, you're much more confident. This is one of the possibilities for the interaction. All right? We have equals here. We got power here. And then we have expectations of sexual interest. It's quite possible that males start off with higher confidence than females do. Right? It's quite possible that they just walk in and they have more confidence. So when they're in the equals position, they might have that level of confidence. I'm going to use for now. All right? They might have that level of confidence when they come in. When they're put into a leadership position, their confidence might increase. Right? We saw that in general, confidence increased going from equals to power. So that might be the effect of going from equals to power for males. We could get an interaction without any difference between males and females for the main effect if women came in with lower confidence, so that when they were placed into an equals position, they had lower confidence than they did prior. But what if giving them a position of power, a leadership position, just massively boosted their confidence? What if they were like, well, this is something I've never experienced before. I'm being put in a position of leadership? Oh my goodness, I must be doing something great. I have much, much more confidence. This is an interaction. The expectation of sexual interest changes more for females than it does for males. But notice the average level for males and the average level for females, exactly the same. So no main effect between males and females. No higher expectations of sexual interest for males or females. But it's quite possible that females experience a greater boost in expectations of sexual interest from a leadership position than males do. On the other hand, it's entirely possible that the opposite occurs. It's also entirely possible that there's no main effect. So in that case, what would happen is you would have equals, you would have power, you would have expectations of sexual interest, you would have males, you would have males and females basically on the same line, so that there's no interaction, that the same boost in expectations of sexual interest that you get from going equals to power positions occurs the same amount for males as it does for females. Those are the possibilities. Either we have an interaction or we don't have an interaction. So what do people think? Any speculations? Does power affect males more? Does power affect females more? Or is power power? And people are people, and it affects both in exactly the same way. Mm-hmm.
I would think that just based on what I've seen in like the news, power affects males more than it would females, just because there's been more cases of males sexually harassing females than the other way around.
Okay, so one possibility is that, actually the one that we got right there, maybe power affects males more than it affects females. And that would explain the preponderance of males in the Me Too movement that got reported. So I remember flipping through a gallery of like 75 individuals that were outed during the Me Too movement, and I found 2 women. You know, so maybe it is that power affects males much more than it does females. Anybody want to argue for the opposite or for the no interaction effect? Mm-hmm.
No.
Possibly no.
Just because there are less females in power. You said you noticed that
Mm-hmm.
there are less females in power, so you can't really see them interacting. Just
Mhm.
because you have that difference there.
Yeah. So there's fewer females in power in popular culture as well. So if I flip through a gallery of 75 directors in Hollywood, I would probably only come across 2 females as well. I'd probably come across Catherine Bigelow and Patty Jenkins, and that's about it. So it could be that power affects them equally, and the reason that we have so many males being reported is because there's just more males in power. Mm-hmm.
I feel like kind of going off what she said, like females kind of take power differently too.
Okay, how so?
I don't really know an example right now, but they kind of like I don't know how to explain it.
Okay. So you're saying that there should be an interaction because females take power differently?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. So yeah, that's a possibility. Sometimes we have these gut feelings and we don't really know what it's going to come out as or what the mechanism might be. But anyways, once again, very interesting question because we have a number of different possibilities, right? We have a number of different, yes, there might be an interaction, no, there might not be an interaction. What was the actual case? It turns out that there was no interaction. There was no evidence of an interaction. Power affected the male subjects the same amount and in the same direction as female subjects. So males were not more, did not have different expectations of sexual interest than females did. That came out in the main effect. And what's more, power did not affect males differently than power affected females. So conclusions that biases in expectations of sexual interest arise from power inequalities, and men in general do not have higher expectations of sexual interest from female counterparts, and power affects males and females equally. So what does this mean in terms of, let's flex our critical thinking skills. What does this mean in terms of society as we move towards more equality across the genders? Mm-hmm.
I guess there would be more cases of men reporting women sexual harassment, but it's just going to increase on the side of women as women become more in power roles.
Exactly. So What this says is that it's not a gender thing. And what's more, it doesn't even interact with gender. It's a power thing. So one of the things that, speaking of power things, one of the things that came out very recently, and this was from the APA, was a report on toxic masculinity. So do people remember that? It was about a year ago. They put out that report on toxic masculinity, and Gillette made that famous commercial, and people either lost their minds one way or the other way, going the other direction. One of the things that kind of led to such a huge reaction towards the ideas of toxic masculinity is the fact that it kind of blended and fit right into the narrative of the Me Too movement. It fit right into the fact that there was a wide preponderance of male predators. So of course, the cause, and this is how correlation works in your mind, people jump to conclusions, of course the cause had to be something about being male. There was way more males than females, so the cause had to be something about being male. That's what we should tackle. We should tackle things like toxic masculinity. Studies like this then indicate that that is not the case. It makes intuitive sense, but the psychological reality is that's not the case. It's a power differential. So Weinstein and Spacey allegedly harassed their subordinates because of that power position. Asia Argento allegedly raped a child, statutory raped a child, because of that power difference. And as that occurs more and more, it's not an actual male thing or a male cause. So if we're looking to reduce sexual harassment, like we should be as just generally good people, it's not, the causes are not anything in how males are socialized, it's not anything in our sort of culture, it's not anything in the sort of toxic masculinity locker room culture where we should be looking at. And I'm not endorsing that. Those are problems that cause other problems. But if you're focusing on sexual harassment, that is not the place to focus it on. It's not on any sort of toxic masculinity. It's on the toxic effects of power and how they change your perception of the people that you are looking at. Mm-hmm. There's a question, comment? No? Okay. Hand that was stretching. All right, so any final comments, questions about this study here and the sort of analysis of interactions and main effects? Okay, so the last one that we're going to take a look at, I'll just set this up because we're going to need more than the 15 minutes that we got left. But we're going to do the same things. We'll set it up, and then next class we'll take a look at it. So at least you'll know the situation, and you'll be able to start to think about the effects of attractiveness on perceived intelligence, right? On perceived merit for a scholarship application. So once again, is it better to be attractive or is it better to be unattractive? And is that effect different if you're a male or if you're a female? And is that effect different if you're being judged by males or you're being judged by females? That's what this complex experimental design was looking at. So it was a study by Aclia, Sporlia, and Maynor back in 2010. Once again, we have a staged manipulation. So subjects were told that the experiment was a scholarship selection committee simulation. So they were well aware that no scholarships were actually being awarded. This was a simulation. And they were told that all they wanted to know was, how do people make decisions on who gets a scholarship? So you would get 3 scholarship applications, and all they wanted to know is, who do you think is the best application? Unknown to them, it was actually a subject about the halo effect. And the halo effect is where one characteristic influences your perception of another characteristic. It's kind of like the halo that angels have. It makes you look like a better person. Putting a ring around your head doesn't actually make you a better person, but it makes you look like a better person. Well, if you're attractive, that doesn't actually make you more intelligent, but does it make you look more intelligent? That's what they're looking for, the halo effect. So this is the situation that they had, and it's got one very important aspect that we absolutely have to be stable on, and then we'll take a look at the results next time. So 3 variables that they looked at, 3 independent variables. Number 1 was subject sex. So the subjects were split into 2 groups, male subjects and female subjects. So these were male judges of who gets a scholarship and female judges of who gets a scholarship. The next variable was the target sex. It was the target of the applicants. And this is the one that needs to be pointed out. One little very crucial characteristic here was that you got 3 applications. They were all from the same target sex. So you either looked at 3 applications from males, or you looked at 3 applications from females. Not one subject got 2 males and a female in their application packet, or 2 females and a male. So keep that in mind. If you were a male and you got a male application, all 3 of your applications were male. If you got a male and you got a female application, all 3 of your applications were from females. And then the last thing that they did was they included a photo with each application. And you'll notice that the names of these researchers were foreign names. They're somewhere in Europe. And apparently that is still a custom that is oftentimes done with applications in different countries. It is not uncommon to submit your resume and submit your photo as well. And it's actually very interesting. And the importance of this study this study actually became more important for the one reason that most applications now for a job, even in North America, come with a photo of the applicant. So why is it that most applications now come with a photo of an applicant? Any ideas?
Is it like to see who they're hiring? Because people are, like, in today's time compared to, I don't know, before social media and things, people didn't put their pictures up like that. Now it's just like whatever people are okay with putting at face.
You're close. You almost got it exactly. It's social media. So whereas before, so people still don't send in their photos with your application. And I highly recommend, do not send in your photo with your application. So when you're applying to grad school, when you're applying to a job and they ask you for a resume, do not attach a little printout photo of yourself. That's not what we do here in North America. It's not seen as professional. But you would be remiss to think that most of us are not one Google search away from knowing how we look. If you got a Facebook account, if you have an Instagram account, if you have any sort of social media presence, if you have been featured in the Prelude, I think they have. What's the preface? Yeah, the newspaper that they have here. If your name has appeared in an article in the preface, like, oh, so and so at the recent advising fair, you're on Google and you're easy to find. So this is actually becoming more and more common, where employers can just look you up, and oftentimes they're looking you up for to see if your credentials match your social media profile. That's why we're doing the social media development. But if you put a selfie of yourself online somewhere, chances are they can see it when they're looking at your resume. So becomes very important. What happened here in this last independent variable is that a picture was attached to each individual application, and that picture was either somebody that was highly attractive, somebody that was in the middle of attractiveness, or somebody that was unattractive. And the way that they typically do these, if anybody's ever interested in doing studies in attractiveness, we all know that different people find different people attractive, right? Some people like blonde hair, some people like brunettes, some people like people really tall, some people like people not so tall. We know that there's a bunch of differences between what people find attractive. So in any study like this, what they typically do is they do a study beforehand where they take like 100 pictures and they just ask people on a scale of 1 to 10, how attractive do you find this individual? And what they'll do is they'll just choose the picture with the highest average That's your highly attractive individual. Picture with the lowest average. That's your unattractive individual. Picture with your average. That's your middle attractive individual. So these are sort of like bias-free in terms of the experimenter. It's not what the experimenter thinks is attractive. It's what the general population thinks is attractive. So there's your situation. So for next time, try to think of what's going to happen. Who is going to get the scholarship in each of these situations? So when a male subject is deciding who's going to get a scholarship, and they're looking at 3 male scholarship applications, who are they going to pick? Are they going to pick the incredibly attractive male? Are they going to pick the middle attractive male? Or are they going to pick the unattractive male? And just so that you know, the quality of the scholarship applications was randomized and counterbalanced. So they were the same across the 3 applications. So what's going to happen when males are judging male applications? Who's going to get picked when males are judging female applications? Are males going to take a look at the highly attractive female and say, wow, she just kind of looks more intelligent to me, I'm going to give her the scholarship? Or are they going to take a look at the highly attractive female and say, well, she kind of looks like the stereotypical bimbo that we hear about, I'm not going to give her the scholarship. She can't possibly be intelligent. What's the effect going to be of attractiveness when males are judging females? And then think about female subjects. What's going to be the effect of attractiveness when females are judging which male should get a scholarship? Are they going to give it to the highly attractive, middle attractive, or unattractive one? And then what's going to happen when females are judging female applications? Which one of these is going to get the highest amount of scholarships from those judges? So that's what we're going to take a look at next time. Is there a main effect for subject sex? Is there a main effect for target sex? Is there a main effect for attractiveness? And then we're going to take a look at each of the interactions, finishing up with the big interaction of what happens when males are judging males, what happens when males are judging females, what happens when females are judging males, what happens when females are judging females. And spoiler alert, it's different for all 4. So try to think about how attractiveness is going to affect each 4 of these judgment combinations. All right, so that's where I wanted to get to for today. Any final comments or questions before we wrap it up? All right, so that is all good. So I will see you next time. So think about who's going to be getting the most scholarships in each of those 4 conditions. And next time we'll see if we're right. Other than that, we're done for today.